Open this hearing of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee into Australia's Defence Honours and Award System. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The committee is conducting today's hearing in Canberra. I am Senator Sharma, the chair of the committee. I'm joined by Senator Ciccone, Senator Cadell, Senator Fawcett, Senator Darmanin and Senator Roberts, and other senators might be joining us later in the day. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript will be made. I remind all witnesses in giving evidence to the committee that they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses have a right to request to be heard in camera should they choose. I remind any witnesses who are appearing via video conference and who are not speaking to mute their microphones. The committee understands that many of you have lived experiences within the Australian Defence Force and the Defence Honours and Awards system more broadly, and your evidence is important to the committee's understanding of the issues raised. If you require a break at any point during proceedings, support services are here today, and committee room 2R2, which is next door, is available should you wish to have a quiet conversation. I also wish to acknowledge the many people appearing before the committee today who have served their nation and express the committee's gratitude for their service to our nation. I would now like to welcome Mr Dan Fortune, DSC and Bar, Mr Jonathan Beesley, Mr Matthew Brennan and Mr Andrew White. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. And for the Hansard record, and before you make your opening statements, will you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today, starting perhaps with Mr Brennan on my left.
Yes, Matthew James Brennan. I'm appearing as a witness as a former commanding officer of a Special Operations Task Group.
Thank you, Mr Brennan. Mr White.
Mr Andrew White, I'm turning up as a witness as a former soldier in SASR.
Okay, thank you. And
Dan
Mr Fortune.
I'm here as a Special Forces veteran and a senior officer to assist the committee.
Thank you, Mr Fortune.
Jonathan Beesley, DSM, here as a witness, former commanding officer of the SAS Regiment, SOTG, Special Operations Task Group.
Thank you very much, Mr Beesley. I would now like to invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks I will invite members of the committee to ask questions. Just bearing in mind the time, we have 1 hour for this block, so if you could try to keep your opening statements to no more than 5 minutes to allow time for questions from the committee and discussions as well. Who would like to begin? Mr Fortune, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all the senators. It's a real privilege and opportunity for us to be here. What we're going to do is read opening statements for about 10 minutes. We'll do that sequentially. We want to read things into the record. And this is in addition to the evidence we've already provided, and I know you're going to have a big day. You're going to have a series of witnesses today. So we thank you. It's a big day. We'll try and get you off on time, but we're going to read things into the record initially. So why are we here? It's really important we feel compelled to take action because the honours and awards synthesise ideals. They're symbols. This coloured cloth embodies a whole range of values and intense actions around valour and distinguished leadership that permeate the DNA of the Australian soldier. We would also argue that this tradition defines who we are as a military warfighting profession of arms and how we emulate the best of us. Now, what we're not here to do is talk about sour grapes. This is not about disaffected veterans having a crack at the title. We want not retribution, we want redemption and a future purpose-fit system that people can believe in. So what are we seeking in specificity? And I'll read more statements into the record, but up front, we want an apology for the disgraceful smearing of our meritorious unit citation, the damage done to the award system. We would like restorative justice for those who have been pejoratively impacted by that denigration. We would like a future fit, purpose-designed, values-centric assurance mechanism. We want to abolish the current tribunal. It's clearly failed. We want to get something that's fit for purpose so that going forward these ideals can be protected. So what is our hope for you today? We'd ask you, as you said, Chair, to ask some questions. Ask questions of men who've led in combat and not been recognised, and seen staff officers in another country recognised for decorated combat awards. We'd ask you to talk to SAS warriors who are nominated for valour in action and their personal conduct, and then have had those nominations downgraded by senior officers. Ask about the absence of accountability of senior ADF leadership. Why are we changing the criteria in the terms of reference of this committee? Why would we be doing that? Ask about the anti-warrior culture that underpins that, to seek to denigrate the gallantry for self-serving purposes. We'd ask you to invite the defence witness to talk about why they think that morale has been trashed, and offer them views about the links to the honours and awards and the backstory of the injustice. How did this happen? I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr Fortune. Mr Brennan.
Good morning, and thanks for your time today. I'm a former Army officer of 30 years service, including 19 years in Special Operations. I was Commanding Officer of Rotation 8 and 9, Special Operations Task Group, Afghanistan in 2009. Special Operations Task Group operations significantly disrupted and degraded Taliban networks in Uruzgan and multiple provinces over 2001 to 2013, and all SOTG members deserve to be proud of this. I challenge anyone to do a better job in the same environment, in the same conditions. The scale, tempo, scope, duration and effects of this campaign are unprecedented in our military history. Saving lives, enabling Afghan-led security. Honours and awards should always be merit-based for outstanding performance against mission in context. This was broken in Afghanistan. It was not free of patronage nor political influence. Soldiers bled and died unrecognised on the battlefield, while senior officers self-awarded, remote from the battlefield. Only around 60% of the nominations for Special Operations Task Group 8 and 9 were awarded, and of those, about half were downgraded. This is unacceptable to me. For example, Major S, who did embody distinguished service, command and leadership in action, and was not awarded. So poor recognition, zero feedback, the threat of or removal of awards since then has damaged mental health and driven moral injury. Outstanding soldiers, like the man sitting next to me, ask, were we worthy? Was it worth the sacrifice? Did our chain of command understand our operations? Did they trust us? Why was a double standard operated and applied? Frustration, confusion, shame, self-doubt, anxiety and depression, intensified by uninformed speculation. The follow-on impacts on families and careers are the salt in our wounds. I ask the committee to note the outstanding achievements of Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan over 2001 to 2013 and call for the objective review of all SOTG Honours and Awards nominations based on merit, mission and context. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Brennan. Mr Beesley.
Good morning. Retired Brigadier Jonathan Beesley, DSM. I'm a former Army officer of 30 years service, a former Commanding Officer of the Special Air Service Regiment and Commanding Officer of the Special Operations Task Group Rotation 19 from 2013. I've deployed on 10 ADF operations throughout my career, and I'm very humbled to have been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for Leadership in Action as a mid-ranking officer. For the record, I was one of the 2 commanding officers of the 20 Special Operations Task Groups not recognised for distinguished service during my tenure in command. Throughout my career, I've had significant exposure to the Defence Honours and Awards system, having successfully submitted and reviewed numerous nominations for personnel either directly or indirectly under my command. Most notably was as the nominating officer for the posthumous award of the Victoria Cross for Australia to Corporal Cameron Baird, VC, MG in 2013. Focusing specifically on Rotation 19 of the Special Operations Task Group, for the purpose of providing additional context to this inquiry, I'd like to highlight that of the 7 nominations for Distinguished Command and Leadership for that rotation, only 3 were awarded. I received no feedback as the nominating officer as to the reasons why these awards were not supported. I am firmly of the view that apprehended bias existed when considering Distinguished Service recognition for SOTG Rotation 19, contrary to the underlying integrity and efficacy of the Australian Honours and Awards system. I believe this was in part due to high-level command perspectives formed without context of a number of unforeseen tactical incidents, a lack of national mission clarity and command guidance, and also, at the time, an unbalanced national command focus towards retrograde and reconstitution. And perhaps this is exemplified by the fact that an Australian senior Army officer was awarded a Distinguished Service Medal for, and I quote, coordinating the redeployment of Australian forces from Afghanistan in 2013. Despite that commentary, I will admit that DSM was awarded for distinguished leadership in warlike operations. All of the SOTG Rotation 19 personnel nominated by me experienced direct engagement with insurgent forces and led with distinction. In dealing with the various tactical incidents, these officers displayed the most outstanding levels of physical and moral courage, key traits of both leadership and command. I believe the Australian National Command, in omitting recognition, also clearly missed an opportunity to provide an example of what good looks like for future commanders, an example that could, perhaps should, be taught in the various military educational institutions within the Australian Defence Force. I sincerely hope the committee applies similar levels of moral courage by recommending a review of the Honours and Awards system. I recommend a further review into distinguished decorations awarded during the Afghanistan campaign. And in the case of Special Operations Task Group, I recommend a review of the nominations for distinguished service by those members who were unduly considered and not formally recognised for their service. If not for them, for their families, and for the many veterans online today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Beesley. Mr White, let's go ahead.
I'll apologise in advance, mine's slightly longer. Honourable Senators, the 2008 Honours and Awards review exposed widespread abuse within the nomination process, describing it as overly complex, slow, inconsistently applied and lacking adequate guidance and transparency. The system was characterised as personality dependent, yielding results that were neither fair nor representative and disproportionately favoured personnel stationed near headquarters and senior ranks, who were often rewarded simply for fulfilling their roles. The review highlighted systematic barriers, noting that the ability to recommend personnel for awards was restricted to senior members. The 8 levels of approval were criticised for failing to add value, while feedback systems were labelled non-existent. Decision makers were often described as too far removed from where the work was done, undermining their ability to accurately assess nominations. As a result, it was stated that the system consistently disadvantaged the majority of the force. Quotas for gallantry awards were exposed alongside the misuse of the Distinguished Service Honours. To preserve the prestige of distinguished awards, many stressed the need for direct involvement in combat or being in action. Specific examples revealed DSCs being inappropriately awarded to senior officers, not commanded forces, in combat. Despite these damning findings, the abuse persisted, particularly among defence senior leadership. Nearly every general who commanded Joint Task Force 633 from Dubai has received honours. 2 were awarded the Conspicuous Service Cross, 10 were made officers or members of the Order of Australia, and at least 15 received Distinguished Service Crosses for command and leadership in action, redefined as warlike service in 2012. The DSC, a Level 2 award and Australia's highest leadership honour, just 2 levels below the Victoria Cross for Australia, awarded for command and leadership in action, was often awarded to those working from the safety of a country not at war, far removed from the dangers faced by the troops. In contrast, to those leading distinguishably from the rear, private soldiers, the backbone of the deployed force, faced daily threats of being shot or blown up as they lived alongside, trained and mentored our Afghan allies, some of whom turned their weapons inward within the supposed safety of their bases. Despite facing relentless adversity and making up the majority of the force, just 15 of countless thousands of privates were recognised as having contributed distinguished service. Each received the lowest honour, the Commendation of Distinguished Service, an award the review deemed insufficient for officers when their performance was considered particularly noteworthy, especially without direct involvement in combat. My experience with the Honours and Awards system began on Friday, the 13th of August 2010, when our 5-man SCSR patrol was ambushed in Shoewaricut Kandahar province. Under intense fire from multiple insurgent positions at close range, Trooper Jason Brown was struck by multiple rounds and fell in the killing area. After neutralising an enemy machine gun, we fought our way into the killing area to recover Jason amid heavy fire. While the remainder of the patrol engaged 2 dug-in positions, I administered first aid to Jason. Tragically, his injuries were severe and proved fatal. I do not claim to have acted gallantly, distinguished or conspicuously that day. Like everyone in the team, I was fighting for my life and Jason's. However, my actions, along with others, were recognised, and our squadron commander nominated me for the Medal for Gallantry. The precedent for awarding the Medal for Gallantry for actions that closely mirrored those for which I was nominated in Afghanistan is well established. Lance Corporal C, Corporal Holder, Private Cox and Trooper B all received the MG for providing medical assistance in hazardous circumstances. Notably, Trooper B's nomination, originally for the Star of Gallantry, was downgraded and took a decade to be awarded. During my MG nomination, consistent with the 2008 review's finding regarding the nomination process being restricted to senior members, the task group commanding officer, an officer from another regiment, now a general, with a member of the Order of Australia, Distinguished Service Cross, Conspicuous Service Cross and Distinguished Service Medal, replaced my squadron commander as the nominator, altered the submission and downgraded the MG nomination to a Commendation for Gallantry. By inserting himself as a nominator, this officer, whom I didn't know and wouldn't meet for another 8 years, excluded my SSR chain of command from any communications with honours and awards, preventing them from clarifying details or seeking a review if the nomination was unsuccessful or downgraded, as policy permits. This is one of 2 MG nominations for SASR soldiers that he denied on that rotation. Despite Service Headquarters' criticism of the paucity of nominations for enlisted ranks in the 2008 review, of the 8 nominations submitted for our squadron, 3 were denied, 2 were downgraded, and only 3 remained unchanged. 14 months after the action and midway through my next deployment to Afghanistan, I was told I had been nominated for an award. By that time, the nomination had been altered a second time, this time at or above the Commander Joint Task Force 633, General rank. It was switched from the gallantry stream to the distinguished service stream without consulting the nominating officer or witnesses who had described my actions as gallantry in action in hazardous circumstances. Ultimately, the award I received, the Commendation for Distinguished Service, a Level 4 award, was downgraded more than a dozen places below the original Medal for Gallantry nomination, a Level 2 award. In what can be only described as deliberate manipulation and blatant maladministration, critical text essential to the gallantry nomination was removed or significantly altered more than 20 times. Among these changes was the removal of 11 key phrases, including outstanding gallantry, hazardous circumstances, and complete disregard for his own safety. These alterations were intentionally crafted to ensure the original MG nomination didn't reach honours and awards in its true form. The changes, along with a drastically altered tone, severely undermined the nomination's impact and were clearly designed to force it to conform with the criteria for the Commendation for Distinguished Service. Despite requiring only a nominating, recommending and approving officers, nominations for diggers must pass through up to 8 approval gates, where they are often discarded, altered or downgraded, without consultation or justification, due to self-imposed quotas, bias or personal opinion. These decisions made by senior officers who, despite wearing honours which imply otherwise, lack first-hand experience of the situations they judge so harshly. This flawed process denies Honours and Awards Directorate, unaware of the original nomination, the opportunity to assess them based on unaltered facts provided by those with first-hand knowledge. These practices exemplify the systemic flaws identified in the 2008 review and continue to consistently disadvantage the majority of the force. By contrast, Despite General Angus Campbell failing to meet the inaction criterion for the Distinguished Service Cross, his 2011 nomination as a Commander Joint Task Force 633 was processed under entirely different standards. With 5 months left on his Al-Minhad posting, General Campbell was preemptively nominated by a subordinate. Unlike the scrutiny faced by diggers, his nomination was fast-tracked, recommended and approved by fellow generals in Canberra within 2 months. Narrowly missing the 2012 Australia Honours List 2 weeks after his tour ended, he received the award in the Queen's Birthday Honours just a month later. In closing, this is not about lamenting my nomination or arguing that I am deserving. It's about representing the thousands of soldiers, sailors and Air Force members whose contributions have gone unrecognised and the few whose nominations survived the process only to be relegated to the lowest honour, the Commendation for Distinguished Service. A level of recognition considered inadequate for particularly noteworthy performance when applied to senior officers. I hope that by using my experience as an example, I've managed to highlight the deep inequity within the system, a system that, despite the 2008 review, has continued to be abused, enabling officers removed from the fight to nominate, recommend, approve and wear Australia's highest leadership award, despite many knowing they failed to meet the qualifying criteria. This practice undermines the integrity of the honours and award system, which must be reformed and made independent to ensure fairness, transparency and recognition based on merit, not rank or privilege. Any recognition should be consistent with and uphold the integrity of the Defence Honours and Award system, ensuring it remains a credible measure of service and achievement. Thank you for your time. We now welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. White, and the other witnesses for your opening statements. I'll turn to Senator Roberts, and then just for the benefit of senators at the table, Senator Roberts, we'll go to Senator Fawcett, Senator Shoebridge, and then Senator Ciccone, Senator Darmanin. And if Senator Cadell, you have questions, you can let me know. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for your service. It's much, much appreciated. And thank you for the quality of your opening statement. Precise words. You conveyed a lot of feeling and a lot of information in that. I couldn't absorb it all right now, but thank you for the quality and thank you for the conviction with which you're speaking. Let me just check, first of all, that I got some of your needs. If there are any additional, just say so afterwards. You want an apology? You want redemptive justice? I'm guessing you want to be heard.
Absolutely. Restorative justice for those pejoratively impacted by what's occurred. It's a disgrace.
You want more than that. You want fairness, objectivity, and you want people to be fair dinkum, a decent system.
The young soldiers and the members of the ADF can look up to and up at.
And you also want integrity, because there's been an abysmal lack of integrity. And I think you also want, I'm sure you want safety and security, because I can't remember who it was. It might have been Mr. Brennan, who used the words, or it might have been Mr. Fortune, who used the words, the medal system or the honour system synthesises the ideals and forms the DNA of the Australian Defence Forces.
That's my view, Senator. Yes, it's a long pedigree of how we got to where we are. We didn't just arrive as a martial warfighting organisation. There's a lot of meaning, symbology and inherent implicit value in the honours and awards system that's been disregarded and insulted by the changing of the criterion. They've walked away from what good looks like.
Thank you, because it goes back to something that I learned from a distinguished officer and a captain, I think, secondly, a few years ago, that Australia's fighting forces, the most valuable component of them is the mateship. It's a strategic weapon that we have that no one else has to the Australian Defence Forces.
In our DNA, it's been what people have said about us, and we fight for each other.
Yep. So when that is attacked and destroyed, then that leaves Aussie soldiers vulnerable in action. This is a matter of life and death, isn't it?
It's more than that. It's so important to who we are and how we see ourselves.
And that applies not just while you're in the forces, but afterwards for many decades.
You go to the War Memorial, there's 100,000 names up there. Those guys are looking down, and girls, and saying, what's going on? Fix it.
And it also applies to recruiting. Because my guess is word of mouth is the most important form of recruiting. And if people are not happy inside and they lose faith and respect for the senior officers, the top brass, then they're not going to talk positively about the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, correct?
I'm going to quote from the January 2024 Australian Defence Force doctrine signed by General Campbell. The doctrine's called Command. Just a couple of points on that which reflect and I think wrap up what you're getting at, and to the ethos and the tenets of military service, which is about the attraction of military service and service to the nation, national security, service in the force and forces, what it means to the individuals, their families, and then through life. So, to quote, accepting personal accountability can be difficult to do, and it's easy to rationalise that blame lies elsewhere. But accepting accountability is a step commanders need to take. If you do not accept accountability for failure, you risk losing your moral authority to command. Subordinates rightly expect their leaders to demonstrate moral courage in the face of disappointment, error or failure. If you fail in this expectation of courage, you will lose the respect and trust of those you lead. Without trust, subordinates become less transparent, collaborative, honest, and ultimately less engaged. They can begin to doubt the sincerity of our values, which you are meant to exemplify, and may even begin to question the basis on which they serve their country. So it goes to that ethos of command and leadership and the purpose and the reason for military service, I guess. It's fundamental to what we're saying today.
Thank you so much. Another thing a strong leader will do is give recognition, acknowledgement, appreciation to the people who he serves, really. The leader does provide a service to the people he's supposed to be leading.
You push the credit down, you take the blame yourself.
Thank you. Yep. So appreciation is extremely important, and Christ even talked about it in terms of gratitude. It's fundamental to humans. But what you're saying is that there's a lack of appreciation in the armed forces and in the award system.
The recognition system has been corrupted and abused by injustice and failures and neglect and willful omission by senior appointments. That's what we're saying.
Thank you. And regardless of all the inquiries and the reviews and the appeals to tribunals and all the rest of it, this is such a fundamental matter that if the Department of Defence was fair dinkum, they would be doing this themselves and fixing the system.
Absolutely. There's a compelling report I've provided in evidence. The Oversight Committee report to the Deputy Prime Minister slammed the accountability decisions made by Brennan, directly criticised CDF Campbell's failures, and it's been ignored, or it's sitting under a pile of dust.
So it doesn't matter?
Well, that's the view that veterans would take.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here saying not good enough. You've got to do better. Please help us, Senators. We believe in you. Do your job. Make people accountable. Fix the system going forward, please. We don't want any more Campbell coward punches. We were coward punched by Campbell. Please don't let that happen to the next generation.
And what we can see in strong leaders, they love being questioned because it gives them an opportunity to see some chinks in their own disposition, and they can improve themselves.
Fair bump play on, bring it on. I didn't get it all right. We're not saying we did, but this is not right, and we are looking blindly obvious. It's got a stench. It's got a stink. Please restore it.
I've had an undeniable sense in the submissions, and we've had plenty, that there's a fear of retaliation for participating and talking to the committee today. Some people have said they're not. I can see heads nodding already. Yeah. So doesn't that really strike fear into anybody who's enlisted at the moment? Because if there's that sense of control, that sense of lack of justice, that sense of fear, that's not the way to lead anything. Is that right?
Senator, if I may add a couple of comments, first of all, to your last, and then perhaps bring it back to honours and awards and medallic recognition. I think there's an element, and part of the reason why we're all here today is an element of moral courage. Yep. The decision to do what we think is right. And we sit here and represent many aspects of the ADF and defence community.
You're doing it because you love the Army, or...?
We do it not because we just love the Army. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and we passionately feel that way. In terms of bringing it back to the honours and awards system, I'd like to just reflect on medallic recognition and what medals mean to individuals and how that relates to trust. I just want to quote actually from Napoleon, who actually said, a soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of coloured tin or coloured ribbon. And this is a profound observation in relation to the soldier psyche and motivation. I'd argue it implies that the soldier doesn't fight for wealth, the soldier doesn't fight for tangible rewards, but for the honour and respect that those ribbons symbolise. It's the emotional and psychological reward that motivates them to endure those hardships and risk their lives. And arguably, that's what drives people to serve and drives recruiting and drives young people to sign up for a life that we have committed to. A soldier's medals tell a story. They tell a story about their service, their sacrifice, and I think in most cases, from a special operations perspective, it tells of mateship, it tells of devotion, it tells a story of extreme valour, gallantry and mateship. Medals that are awarded that are not fit for purpose compromise the integrity of that award system and breach the trust that you spoke of, that is extremely important when it comes to leadership and command.
Thank you so much. I noticed the time, so I better hand over. I'm happy to ask more questions if there's time at the end.
Let's rotate the call for now. Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Fawcett.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your service to the country and the leadership you have given to men, and Mr White, to your gallantry in your service. The root causes of the problems we're talking about today, to my mind, actually come out through some of the recommendations in that 2008 report. And I just want to test some of these thoughts with you, because that will guide our considerations and recommendations for how we rectify. The first question is why we recognise, and I think there are some things that are uncontested. So a long service medal, for example, you served, you get the medal. You know, there's a clear criteria, you serve. Campaign medal, you're part of a deployed force, uncontentious, you get the medal. Exemplary leadership or service, that is somewhat more woolly, if you like, and I'd be interested in your comments as to how we break that down. But the fourth category, and this goes to Mr White, your experience, medallic recognition has also in the past gone to gallantry as a distinct element from service. And I think that is something that we need to continue to recognise. So that's the first question. And I come back to recommendation 1 from that 2008 report, where it says the goal of the new system is to recognise an appropriate number, which I question as a outcome, for dedication, achievement and service. And gallantry is missing from that list altogether. So just in terms of who we recognise, first off, is there any basis for an appropriate number? Those who've had long service, you recognise. Those who went to a campaign, you recognise everyone. For the others...
There shouldn't be quote, sorry.
For the others, is that ever appropriate to have an appropriate number?
Not as a first principle, I would offer. I would respond that it's always going to be contentious, and while I agree with you in principle, you know, long service medals or service medals and campaigns can be contentious. I just put that up front.
Sure.
It's never. It's always tricky around recognition, and it's okay. And the way you mitigate the subjectivity and the abuse of that is through some principles and some ideals that you then codify and hold up as what good looks like.
So we've drifted. Mr. Fortune. There's just a member of the media here. I just wanted to check that all the witnesses are happy.
Hey, we're loud and proud, mate.
All right, good.
He's from ABC. I'm not good with it. I'm joking.
Just wanted to alert you to that. Sorry.
No, we're here in avatars. You can tell. For all our fans online, how are we going so far? Yeah.
Please go.
Yeah, so it's contentious. You standardise it. Look what bench. So I'll get the guys to talk about process, but it comes back to the why. This is a set of values and ideals around gallantry. So it's always going to be contentious around the judgments. You codify those with what good looks like and you hold to the line. We've just drifted. Quotas, no, because that compromises merit. And you end up with the diggers getting rolled over because all the senior Ruperts, well, of course. And I'm guilty as charged.
I think with the Distinguished Service Cross in Al Minhad, there was 8 subsequent awards of the Distinguished Service Cross. I might be slightly wrong, it might be 5, but it is in that vicinity. The first guy that was awarded it, by nature of distinguished service, that second general that was awarded it should have been done a better job than the first guy. So that, the 8th person that was successively awarded it, how did we lose in Afghanistan with such distinguished service? With regards to quotas, the review abolished quotas in 2007-8. But 2014, in the DHAT tribunal, a 1-star general was noted as putting awards into order, signifying that it was still using self-imposed quotas for gallantry awards. So even though the DHAT and Honours and Awards had done away with quotas, they were still being used. There is no place for quotas. And I think initially mine was downgraded due to quotas because 2010 was, at that point, the most dangerous and violent phase of the war. And during that period, there were 3 Victoria Crosses nominated for. 2 were awarded. 1 was downgraded as a Star Gallantry. I think there was 3 Star Gallantries awarded and numerous medals for gallantry. So I think a number of gallantry awards were downgraded because of quotas. I do.
It's standards and conditions, not quotas. Standards and conditions.
Sure.
So, Senator, I'd just like to add, and for the reason we are here today is obviously to support the recommendation of a review into the Australian Defence Honours and Awards system. What became of the Honours and Awards system, particularly distinguished decorations, I would argue was no longer fit for purpose. And this is part of the reason why some of the language was changed from inaction to in warlike operations. And I think that's indicative of the fact that there was an attempt to make it fit for purpose. Any review should deliver a system that is fit for purpose. I am confident the performance of senior officers in the ADF on operations is worthy of recognition. But the way that distinguished service decorations are currently articulated, that is not necessarily the fit for that service. Distinguished service, we should consider proximity as part of the criteria for the award of distinguished service decorations. And I talk about proximity in terms of command, leadership and accountability. Within command, I talk about proximity to responsibility, the legal authority and also the accountability that that commander has. And if you can apply proximity to that, i.e. someone who looks a soldier in the eye and tells him you are going to run to the sound of guns, there's an element of proximity to that compared to somebody who is coordinating maybe a broader response or broader defence contribution in another location.
Sure. Can I just move on to the second grouping because it goes to that point, which is around, we've talked about why we recognise service, etc., but then how do we distinguish? And so that warlike service versus inaction is an interesting distinction as we look at the conflict in Ukraine, for example, compared to World War I, a trench. The person who didn't get out of the trench clearly failed to meet the expected standard. The majority did their job. Those who led a small team to go forward and put themselves individually in risk to rescue someone, take out a machine gun post, whatever, clearly went above and beyond the expected standard. That was a very simple way to assess. Whereas, how do we assess in Ukraine, for example, the young man or woman in a foxhole somewhere operating a first-person view drone that has to make pretty quick decisions around, is this a busload of kids going to school or is this a... And if you get the decision wrong, you lose the public relations war. You know what I'm getting at.
I do.
How do we distinguish leadership? Is it only those people for if the DSC type thing, is it only those people who are making those decisions under immediate threat to their own life, or is there a way to recognise the complexity of modern warfare?
Well, I can offer you a response and I'll invite my colleagues. And others write about this. The nature of war, fear, fog, chaos and imminent confronting immortality, and what that does to you is unchanged. The innate characteristics of war, technology, the remoteness, the distributed battle space, and all of the ways that we fight now are evolving. So my view to you is that, that is not a new story. War has always evolved in its characters, but the recognition of the principles of what we're talking about don't need to change. It's, as Jono said, proximity. It's accountability for putting people in harm's way and telling them to go to their death. That cuts out at a certain level. We know where that is. The system has been drifting because the senior officers, in my view, haven't been able to justify their own awards, so they've started to fiddle with the principles and the superstructure and the pillars. So this question it's like the Kardashian. We don't need to ask it because no one's interested in the answer. We know what good looks like, drifting around. So you stick to principles, accountability, and I'll leave it with, and Andy's been there, and I've had some experience. If you share danger and you're in proximity, you build trust and you get insight. And then when you need speed of decision, you get it quickly. And the lessons out of Ukraine are about adaptability to win. So if we're going to win, we need trust. We've got a system that we don't believe in, we don't have trust. So it is about combat capability. So the answer is you stick to the principles and you don't get caught into all this technical claptrap. You know what good looks like and you stay with it.
In 2010, General John Cantwell went out on patrol with the MTF with diggers and came under fire. And I commend him for that because I think it was the Chief of Defence Force at the time told him not to. But as diggers, you don't expect generals to be out sharing them same danger with you. Their job strategy, interface with politicians and government. So you don't expect them there. And I think the issue with the Distinguished Service Cross stems back to the Imperial Awards when we changed from the Imperial Awards in '91 and came across to the Australian system. The original Leadership Medal was just a leadership medal. It wasn't in-action warlike service. So we've kind of pigeonholed ourselves into the warlike service, what it is now, or in-action, what it was then. So personally, I think it needs to be another stream of medals to account for those who aren't directly in harm's way on a daily basis due to their role, and nor should they be.
Like the old DSO or that sort of...
Yeah,
you preserve the integrity of what the uniqueness of what the inaction is, but you recognise that recognition is important and you build a fit-for-purpose system that's future-centric, not back in the day and how does it work now? Well, it doesn't. Let's get forward.
And I'm conscious I'm going to get wound up, so my last question before the Chair winds me up here is in terms of process, reading through your submissions, I don't detect a lack of trust in, for example, the tribunal or the fact we have an Honours Awards who assess things, but there is a concern around the process, how the original recommendation reaches that person or that group, and feel free to correct me if that's wrong. But that process, to my mind now with digital systems, we should be able to say, in your case, Mr. White, your original, the OC who made that recommendation, his recommendation should have been like a foundational document that was present and visible to every person in that chain. So no matter who else wanted to change something, the final group who were making the decision could see the original, and then if they wish to question why changes have been made. If something like that was in place, would that address many of the concerns you've expressed?
From my experience, Honours and Awards Directorate have been great. The people I've worked with there, interacted with there have been fantastic. And the tribunal that was stood up by Kevin Rudd, I think it was 07, 08, when it was designed to take the politics out of Honours and Awards, do a fantastic job. And they overturn 95% of Defence Forces rejections for upgrades. So they're impartial, they go by fact, they're not emotional, and it's done its job. Personally, I would like to see the Honours and Awards Directorate taken away from Defence as a separate institution, because at the moment you've got awards being put in for generals to their subordinates. they're not going to turn them down. Honours and Awards Directorate can't turn them down because they answer, to them, generals. So it needs to be like the Canadian system and the British system, it needs to be separate.
Independence, transparency. I think we'll have other witnesses today who'll talk to the process better and have much more technical insight. But where you're going is right. Upfront data system, assurance of the process.
Bringing it back to objective, merit-based. Within the mission, the context of the mission at the time and the role and function of that person. And the touch earlier on the comment you made around and the question you had around the complexity of warfighting in the 21st century. That is true. Things have evolved and are evolving daily on the battlefield in Ukraine, for example. Our argument would be that the systems and processes around recognition need to evolve with the way that wars are being fought, and that what we experienced with the Afghan context was it had already drifted. It's very much a 20th century construct of honours and awards processes and systems, which was beyond its use by, absolutely, and we have been victims of that, and a lot of other soldiers and officers. And so evolving to that with the nature of warfare is the reason why we're saying a review is necessary. And the complexity of the issues are not something we can answer here in the room today, but a proper review, objective, merit-based, mission-based, is something that's just essential.
Just to add to that, Senator, sorry, just quickly, I believe personally that the nominations from the original nominator should be computer-based and sent directly to Honours and Awards through whatever system, but it should not be allowed to be altered at all. There should be separate places where people can comment for or against, but essentially Honours and Awards Directorate should receive all of the information and comments from the nominating, approving and recommending change.
And I'm not certain that the current review system is correct.
Make this quick.
Sorry?
Because we do want to get to the other.
You mentioned the review tribunal. I'm not convinced in terms of reference are right. I don't share my colleagues' confidence in them. I believe that the composition of that team needs to be looked at. Who's making the review decisions? What are their competencies? What are their skills? I think that's part of the review. You need an assurance. I'm not sure it's fit for purpose even now, what they're doing now.
Thank you. Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and thanks all for your evidence. Just to finish off that point about the tribunal is meant to be statutorily independent, and I don't think it does report back into the chain of command, but obviously it's populated largely by people from within defence, retired elements of defence.
The cynic might say the cartel of the Canberra elite.
So that's, I suppose, if to verbal you slightly, if the club is in charge of an independent tribunal, it's not going to be harsh on the club.
That's not a verbal, that's a fairly accurate characterisation.
All right.
I
think you've got what you want.
So, and so it's not necessarily the legal structure, it's the process which populates the tribunal.
The people making the decisions.
Yep, I understand. And then the remit of the tribunal to not just be in review, but to having a kind of primary decision-making role as well.
A safeguard of the principles, an assurance and integrity type role that also has a quality assurance role. More than just the process, and that's important, governance, and otherwise you end up with a bureaucracy, not a system to recognise valour and what we're about. And that's where we've drifted. It's all the bureaucrats, talking about their decision governance versus why we're making decisions and what the hell we're doing here and what's about.
I think if the Honours and Awards Directorate were separate to Defence, DHAP would be less busy.
That could be an ultimate goal, couldn't it? Making the tribunal less busy because we have the system works and it's seen to have independence. Yeah. All right. Could we go back to one of the core issues that keeps being raised by yourself and other witnesses, and I think it's repeatedly raised, is the disparity between the accountability for senior officers and the accountability for troops on the ground. And I think a number of you have referenced in one way or another the oversight panel's report, the Afghan Inquiry Implementation Oversight Panel report.
Yep, Dr. Cadell, Rufus Black, yep.
Yeah, I think it was chaired by Dr. Vivian Tom. And it made a series of recommendations, and then it seems to have been sort of, completely dropped. They don't seem to have gone anywhere.
I'd say buried because of feckless hypocrisy in the political accountability system.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the issues Dr. Tom's panel took issue with was the Brennan inquiry's decision that there was no command responsibility. And I think I've got the report here. I think it's page 35 of the Tom report. It says, the panel's terms of reference authorise it to recommend additional actions not contemplated in the recommendations of the inquiry. The panel did not agree with the Brereton inquiry's view that some accountability and responsibility could not fall on the most senior officers, and it suggested that the issue should be the subject of further consideration.
That's a smoking gun. Thank you for pointing it out and reading new evidence.
It then talks about how in the private sector, major corporate failures result in both organisational and individual responsibility, and gives some details about that.
Yeah.
And I won't read it all, but a paragraph that really struck me is this. As part of individual responsibility, senior officers who held office when a corporate failure took place may suffer the following consequences. The chair of the board and the chief executive officer may resign or be dismissed. Other officers may be dismissed or demoted, and some officers with direct involvement in the circumstances of the failure may be the subject of disciplinary proceedings or criminal charges. Personal knowledge or direct involvement of the senior officers in the causes or behaviour that led to the corporate failure are not required. The responsibility and accountability arise not from the directors or senior officers' direct acts or omissions, but the corporate failure to identify and prevent unacceptable behaviour, and in some cases unlawful conduct over which they presided. In short, their responsibility arises from the fact that the failure occurred on their watch.
Well said, Senator. I've pondered that report carefully. I've provided reference to it in my evidence. We've got a smoking gun and everyone's avoiding eye contact because it wasn't good enough. Why is it so hard? So I think this panel has to determine accountability. We're not here for retribution, but if there's failures, neglect, omission, if you believe in a truth that's worth defending, if someone's going to be held with all the glory and the kudos, then they should face the music.
Senator, can I just add something to that? Regarding the revocation of the 7 Distinguished Service Awards from Special Operations Commanders, General Angus Campbell in his letters stated to them, commanders lonely, and it is with commanders that the buck stops, not only for their performance, but also for that of their troops. He continued, the unresolved command accountability is causing ongoing damage to the Army, especially its officer corps, the trust between officers and soldiers, and public trust and confidence in the Australian Defence Force. I'd just like to say nothing destroys trust faster than the gap between what leaders say and what they do. And the leader leads by example, whether they intend to or not.
And to be quite clear, in this context, we have that same senior officer whose conduct in part was said should have been held accountable in this Tom report, effectively mark his own homework about whether he should retain a medal. Turns out he thought he should.
Massive conflict of interest.
At the same time as taking a series of medals off those who were within his chain of command. It's the disparity and the...
It's a sneering hypocrisy, Senator. It's wrong.
3,000 soldiers lose meritorious unit citations, which I refuse to wear, simply because he tried to revoke it.
Stained.
Why should 7 SOCOM officers have their Distinguished Service Awards taken off them preemptively? And why can he decide to keep his own award as a deciding authority? That's why honours and awards need to be separate to defence.
So the Minister of the Day have served with the then former CDF. Massive conflicts, undeclared, unmitigated, unmanaged. And here we are saying not good enough, please help us fix it. We're not looking back, but you raise a good point, Senator. If there's accountability, please enforce it.
And from my memory, I could be wrong, but I think the nomination for General Campbell's medal actually came from the current CDF as well, which sort of points to the club-like circle that we have here, doesn't it?
I think Admiral Johnson stated it was in line with what had been going on for a while, which was essentially 100 days in country. He hadn't done 100 days in country at the time of his nomination.
Senior officers see these decorations as part of their CV, part of their transition package, so they can monetise the award system for their consultancy. And that's a fairly broad statement, but I'm backing it because that's what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, other witnesses say that this medal that Angus Campbell got was just seen as part of the salary package for the job.
Yeah.
So when Vivian Tom's report says...
Have another look at this.
Yeah, well, to use the words, the issue should be the subject of further consideration.
Crickets.
Well, yeah, there's absolutely been no further consideration. This was, buried like a sort of inconvenient, sort
Truth.
of rotten...
Uncomfortable truth.
Uncomfortable truth.
Senator?
Well, I'm asking you then, you're here. What should that further consideration be? What should it look like?
I think my colleagues have said that. We have a good look at this, rip the scab off it.
Yeah, but who?
Well, there's accountable individuals. Start with the Minister of Defence, the CDF.
No, I get the class of people who should be under investigation, but who do we task with the job? We could get a retired general. We could get a former...
who should do the work? Well, I'll leave that for better people than me, because I'm a bit too close to it.
Well, maybe what I ask you to do is take that under consideration, because and I'll give you the opportunity to reply on notice if you have some collective thoughts about who or what would be the appropriate body to do that.
Well, okay, but thank you. We'll ponder that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested, would you have more faith in someone who has served within the system or someone who is completely external to the system?
A combination of both, I think, Senator, to provide that balance would be appropriate.
Been in a number of great individuals.
What that looks like in terms of a separate body, I think would be subject to a number of discussions and perhaps recommendations from yourselves after you hear from
You'd need the
today.
cultural knowledge and the advice and the understanding of the organisation, but you couldn't allow that to have complete dominance of the decision. There'd need to be independence too.
Absolutely.
And with the right leader with the right moral courage, that's nothing new inside the institution. We have had great CDFs and leaders who haven't had to be confected with this problem. We've got failures.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Senator Shoebridge. Senator Darmanin. Then I think after your block of questions, we'll move to the next witness, if that's all right, in the interest of time. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In the interest of time, maybe I'll just wrap up my questions into one. And thank you very much for coming and for sharing and putting so much time into your submissions and being here today. A couple of things I've got. Perhaps since the Royal Commission, in your view, has anything changed in regards to this system? The second part of my question is, if you could talk a little bit more about, what has been the impact on personnel where you've seen downgrading or non-awarding of honours in a bit more detail? Like what does it look like? Do we have people leaving the service? Do we, what does that look like? And then I was interested, I'm not sure, I think it was Mr Fortune that said it in your opening statement, but it could have been one of the others. Just what do you mean by denigration of anti-warrior culture? And if you just talk a bit more about that statement.
I'll go to that in a minute. My colleagues are really keen to answer your questions, but the anti-warrior culture, we've had the demonisation of a warrior culture. It's in the Brett report. It's a desecration of the warrior culture. It's about benchmarking yourself on yourself, about selfless bravery, standing in front of people who can't. It's been denigrated and written back in a woke, sort of sneering arrogance that it's some sort of bikie, criminalised culture. And I've provided evidence of a former commanding officer who talks to that in some detail, and I commend you to look at that evidence. But I'll invite my colleagues to talk to those issues. But the anti-warrior culture is claptrap, and it's part of the problem.
So I just want to focus on the impact on personnel that you mentioned in terms of downgrading. It's an individual thing, the awarding of medals. Unfortunately, some now choose not to wear their medals, not to wear these symbols of service, sacrifice, mateship, and all of the values that we serve for. And that's pretty sad. There are some whose awards were downgraded and they choose not to wear the downgraded recognition with the remainder of their medals. Case in point.
No MUC, no bloody gong.
To be honest, I didn't want to be a hypocrite coming here today wearing an award that was awarded with false information in the nomination. That's why I didn't wear it today. And I didn't come here either to insult anyone or demean their service. But I'll just go back to what General Morrison said in, I think it's 2016, the standard you walk past is the standard you set, and the standard has been pretty poor. It's a two-tier level of accountability and recognition, and it directly impacts morale, it directly impacts retention, it directly impacts recruitment, and it needs answering.
I'll just touch on the first two parts of your question. Royal Commission. Well, first of all, there's three recommendations that I've discerned to be pertinent to this subject. Recommendation 9, improving organisational culture and leadership accountability to increase member wellbeing and safety, and it'll link back to what I'm about to say as well, and to my earlier comment. Recommendation 11, assess Australian Defence Force leaders based on upward feedback and performance against culture, health and wellbeing targets. And these are deeply thought through and analysed and with much evidence brought to bear from the Royal Commission witnesses over 3 or 4 years, which has brought them to this. And lastly, and as importantly, recommendation 78, prevent, minimise and treat moral injury. And moral injury is in that context of the Defence Service, and it links absolutely back to exactly what we're talking about. What have been the impacts on personnel? Well, firstly, what changes have been made since the final report of the Royal Commission? I actually have a co-CEO of a veteran support organisation, and I track the veteran support sector closely. We've seen regular impact across what I said earlier around confusion, frustration, shame, self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and the worst case is obviously a variety of the different witnesses' statements to the Royal Commission in the last couple of years, with that worst case outcome in terms of self-harm, suicide. So confusion around what it is to have served, what it means to have served. Were you recognised? Were you appreciated? Was it worth it? But many veterans are silent because they're either too proud, too humble, too ashamed or too embarrassed to publicly or outwardly express a view because of the mixed messaging and the compromise or corruption of the integrity of a system such as honours and awards, which have been subject to. That's probably the key points I'd have for your question. Thanks.
And they're damaged as well, and they don't have the resources and capacity to get here and do this. This isn't easy for any of us, and it's tough to be here, but we're sort of doing it on behalf of as well as.
My second question, whether to come today simply because I didn't want my appearance here to look like I was moaning about not getting an award that I was nominated for, and that's definitely not the case. Yeah.
And I've been quite direct on social media, and I've got 2 DSC, so I'm a bit compromised. But mine have been diminished and my service has been denigrated. It's not about me, it's about what they mean to me. I joined the army as a 17-year-old and all that has been torn down in front of me. What happened? Please help us fix this.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Darmanin. Yes.
That last
Senator
point
Cadell.
about when you talk about being diminished, when you gave the quote from Napoleon about the coloured ribbon and the coloured bit of metal, it used to be, in your words you've used on my account about 6 times, what good looks like. Is it turning into the sports trophy for everyone? Is it a participation trophy now in some use?
It's a tricky question. The value has been diminished. The system has been corrupted by self-serving individuals. That's what I'll offer to you as my response.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My colleagues, and in the interest of time, we will now move on to the next witness. I wanted to thank the witnesses for your appearance, your candour, and of course the courage and bravery you've shown in serving our nation, and acknowledge that as well. Thank you for your time today as well. You've given us much to think about, and thank you also for the submissions you made to the inquiry.
Team Australia.
Thank you.